The LSAT is a reasoning test, but most people misunderstand what it's actually testing, especially in logical reasoning. It's not about knowing formal logic. It's not about remembering a list of fallacies. And it's definitely not about finishing faster than everyone else. It's about one thing. Can you read a short paragraph and figure out what the author is really trying to say? Not just what they mention, not just the facts, but the purpose of the paragraph, the actual idea they're trying to convince you of. If you can't identify that one sentence, the main conclusion, every other part of logical reasoning becomes 10 times harder. You'll misread, strengthen, and weaken questions because you won't know what you're trying to support or attack. You'll struggle with flaw questions because you'll be fixing the wrong part of the argument. And assumption questions, forget it. You can't spot the hidden gaps unless you know the point the author is trying to make. Think of the conclusion as the target. If you don't know what you're aiming at, how can you possibly hit the bullseye? That's why mastering main conclusion questions isn't optional. It's the skill that sits underneath every other skill in logical reasoning. And here's the kicker. The LSAT doesn't care how smart you are. They don't care if you're a prelaw or someone who's never even taken a logic class in their life. They care about one thing. Can you read a paragraph that's deliberately written to confuse you and still extract the one sentence that matters? That's the test. Because in the real world, in courtrooms, negotiations, policy debates, you're going to hear a lot of noise. People are going to throw data at you. They'll quote experts. They'll use complicated language. And buried somewhere in there is their actual agenda. And the LSAT wants to know, can you cut through that noise? Can you spot the difference between someone giving context and someone trying to persuade? Can you resist the urge to grab the first sentence that sounds right and instead slow down and evaluate what the author is actually building toward? That's what this section trains. And the students who take this seriously, who stop rushing and start reading structurally, are the same ones who jump 10, 20, even 30 points in their score. Because once this clicks, you stop fighting the test, you start seeing the patterns. So if you're stuck in the 150s or the 160s, constantly debating between two tempting answers and getting them wrong again and again, there's a high chance it's not a logic problem, it's a conclusion problem. Fix that, and everything becomes easier. A lot of people approach logical reasoning like it's a reading quiz. They try to memorize patterns. They try to remember which fallacies go where. They learn fancy words like ad hominem or equivocation, hoping those labels will save them. But the LSAT isn't testing your vocabulary. It's not testing whether you took a logic class in college. It's testing something far more basic and far more important. Can you understand how arguments work? That's it. Every logical reasoning argument has three parts: the stimulus, the question stem, and the answer choices. The stimulus is the paragraph you're analyzing. Sometimes it's just 2 sentences. Sometimes it's 5. But it always contains the key argument or reasoning you're being asked about. The question stem is the actual question. It tells you what your job is. For main conclusion questions, it'll say something like, which one of the following most accurately expresses the main conclusion of the argument? Seems simple, right? But unless you know how arguments are built, you're going to fall for the traps. Now, the answer choices are where the LSAT turns up the difficulty. 5 options, 4 of them crafted to distract you. Only one of them directly answers the question the STEM is asking. The others will tempt you with truth, logic, and relevance, but they won't answer the question. So, how do you navigate this? First, you need to know this. Most logical reasoning questions give you arguments, not just random facts. And this distinction matters. An argument is when the author makes a point, then tries to back it up. They're not just listing facts, they're trying to persuade you. It's like the mini version of a legal brief. The author has an opinion. They want you to believe something, and they give you reasons to believe it. That's your job, to untangle the argument, to identify which sentence is the author's main point and which ones are just there to support it. Let me give you a simple example. Pollution levels have risen dramatically in the past 5 years. Therefore, we should invest more in public transportation. That's an argument. The first sentence gives you a fact. The second sentence gives you the author's recommendation, the conclusion. Now compare it to this. Pollution levels have risen. Car usage is up 21%. Public transportation ridership is down. That's not an argument. It's just a list of observations. No opinion, no recommendation, no persuasion. If you try to find the conclusion in that second example, you're wasting your time because there isn't one. And here's where most students go wrong. They don't slow down enough to figure out whether they're even dealing with an argument. They just see some complex wording, panic, and jump into the choices. Big mistake. The LSAT doesn't reward speed, it rewards clarity. So before you even think about the answers, stop and ask, is this an argument or just a fact set? If it's an argument, what's the author trying to prove? What's their reasoning? What's their conclusion? That's the real test. Because logical reasoning isn't about memorizing rules. It's about reading carefully, thinking structurally, and spotting the relationship between sentences. Once you start reading logical reasoning questions through that lens, argument versus fact set, premise versus conclusion, the LSAT becomes less about figuring out the right answer and more about seeing how the argument is built. And when you can do that, you're not playing defense anymore, you're playing offense. You're spotting traps before they can confuse you. You're eliminating bad answer choices with confidence. You're walking into each question with a clear sense of purpose, not just hoping something clicks. That's what logical reasoning is actually testing, not logic, but clarity. Now, if you don't know whether you're reading an argument or a fact set, you're wasting your time. Because main conclusion questions aren't asking, what's the most interesting fact in this paragraph? They're asking, what's the author trying to prove? And if you can't tell whether the paragraph is trying to prove anything at all, you're done before you've even hit the choices. This is the foundational distinction, and the LSAT uses it to trap anyone who's reading too fast. Let me show you the difference and give you an example that makes this 100% clear. A fact set is a paragraph that gives you data, descriptions, or neutral observations, but doesn't try to convince you of anything. There's no conclusion, no recommendation, no argument. It's like a Wikipedia entry, informative, but not persuasive. For example, quote, traffic congestion in Metro City has increased 25% over the past 5 years. The average commuter now spends 47 minutes per day in transit. A recent study showed that 60% of residents are dissatisfied with public transportation. Now pause. Is this an argument? Nope. It's just a list of facts. True? Maybe. Interesting? Possibly. Persuasive? Not at all. There is no judgment, no opinion, no we should or therefore or because of this. It's just background. So, if you get a main conclusion question on this, trick question, there is no conclusion. They just wouldn't do that. If you go hunting for a conclusion here, you're not doing LSAT reasoning, you're doing guesswork. Now, an argument gives you a claim and backs it up with reasons. There is a point the author wants you to believe. There's a sentence that other sentences exist to support. That's your conclusion. Let's take those same facts and build an argument out of them. Traffic congestion in Metro City increased 25% over the past 5 years. The average commuter now spends 47 minutes per day in transit. A recent survey showed that 60% of residents are dissatisfied with public transportation. Therefore, the city should invest in a rapid bus network to reduce traffic and improve commuter satisfaction. That final sentence changes everything. Now we have a problem, congestion and dissatisfaction, data, commute time and survey results, and a proposed solution to build a rapid bus network. That is an argument. The entire paragraph now exists to push one idea. Let's fix this with a new bus system. That's the main conclusion. And everything else is just support. Now, if you treat a fact set like an argument, you'll end up guessing at what the author might want, picking choices based on assumptions, falling for inferences, scope shifts, and trap answers. And if you treat an argument like a fact set, you'll miss the actual claim, you'll choose a true but irrelevant answer, and you'll get crushed on every conclusion-based question. This is the root cause of many logical reasoning mistakes. So, as soon as you finish reading the stimulus, ask yourself, did the author make a point, or did they just share information? If the author takes a position, it's an argument. If they're just describing, it's a fact set. Say it out loud if you have to. This is just data, or this is pushing a claim. That 3-second habit will save you from half of the trap answers on main conclusion questions and help you process the structure faster on every other question type too. Now let's get something straight. The LSAT does not care what you think is the most important sentence. It cares what the author is trying to prove. And that's where most people go wrong. They think a conclusion is just whatever sentence sounds the most confident, or the one with the word therefore, or the last line of the paragraph. But that's not how it works. A real conclusion is not about where the sentence is located or how dramatic it sounds. It's about function. It's the sentence that everything else in the argument exists to support. Let me say that again. The conclusion is supported by the rest, not the other way around. That's the mental shift you need. Because when you read a logical reasoning stimulus, your job isn't to summarize it, or to agree with it, or to rank which sentence is most compelling. Your job is to ask one specific question. What is the author trying to get me to believe? Let's take a look at how this works. Quote, plastic straws make up less than 1% of ocean waste. Banning them would have almost no effect on pollution. Therefore, we should not focus on banning straws. Here's what's going on. The first sentence is a fact. The second sentence is the interpretation of the fact. And the third sentence is the recommendation, and that's the conclusion. Why? Because the first two sentences are just there to build the case, the point. The claim the author wants you to walk away believing is that we should not focus on banning straws. That's what the LSAT wants you to identify. Not what's factual, not what's well written, what's being supported. Now here is another version a bit trickier. Quote, banning plastic straws is unlikely to reduce overall pollution since they make up less than 1% of ocean waste. Instead, efforts should focus on industrial pollutants. There's no therefore, there's no thus, but there is a conclusion. Efforts should focus on industrial pollutants. That's the author's actual point. Everything else is a setup. Now here's where things get tricky. Many students stop at the since they make up less than 1% part and say, oh, that must be the conclusion because it sounds important. Nope, that is a premise. It's a reason that supports the author's bigger claim that we're focusing on the wrong problem. Now here's a better way to think about conclusions. Construction. Imagine every argument is a little house. The premises are the foundation. They are the support beams. The conclusion is the roof, the final piece that holds the whole structure up. The LSAT wants to know if you can tell which is which. Because if you mistake a support beam for the roof, you're gonna pick the wrong answer every time. And don't rely on where a sentence shows up. Sometimes the roof comes at the beginning. Sometimes it's hidden in the middle. And sometimes it's the very last thing the author says. You've got to look at function, not position. Ask, what are the other sentences doing? Are they introducing a fact? Are they offering a statistic? Are they describing what many people believe? Or are they pointing you toward a claim the author wants you to accept? That is your real test. Now let's make this even more practical. A conclusion is a claim the author wants you to believe. supported by other parts of the argument, and the reason the author bothered writing the paragraph. A conclusion is not just a strong statement, any sentence with therefore in it. The last sentence just because it's last, and it's not something you infer or assume the author meant. If you're picking answers based on what you think the author should have said, or what feels like the most important point, you're not doing LSAT reasoning, you're doing guesswork. And that's exactly how the test is designed to trip you up. Your new job going forward is this. When you read a stimulus, don't just read for content. Read like a surgeon. Dissect the argument. Ask yourself, what sentence is everything else here designed to prove? That's the one that matters. That's the one the LSAT is asking about. And once you know what real conclusions look like, you stop getting tricked by noise and start seeing the structure the test writers built for you to find. Now that you know what a real conclusion does, it's the sentence supported by everything else, let's talk about a tool most LSAT students learn way too early and rely on way too much. Conclusion indicator words. You've probably seen the list before. Therefore, thus, so, clearly, hence, it follows that, consequently, we should. Seems simple, right? Look for a therefore, and you've found the conclusion. Wrong. That is not how the LSAT works. Yes, conclusion indicators can help. They are clues, but they're not guarantees. If you rely on them too heavily, you'll fall for every single trap the test throws at you. Let me explain why with a basic example. Now, of course, these words do often signal the conclusion. For example, quote, crime has increased significantly in the city. Therefore, we need more funding for community programs. That's clean. The first sentence gives you a premise, a reason. The second sentence gives you the conclusion flagged by therefore. In this case, the conclusion indicator works exactly the way it's supposed to. But that's because the structure is simple. The LSAT isn't going to give you that every time. In fact, it rarely does. Which brings us to the real issue, which is that the LSAT knows you're looking for indicator words, so they use them to mislead you. They'll stick the word thus or so in front of a subconclusion, not the main conclusion, and they'll watch you take the bait. Here's what that looks like. Quote, it's snowing heavily, so the roads are dangerous. Therefore, we should cancel school. So it's snowing heavily is a premise. The roads are dangerous is a sub-conclusion. And we should cancel school is the main conclusion. Now here's the trap. If you blindly follow the word so, you're going to choose the roads are dangerous as the conclusion. But it's not. It's just a step along the way. The real point, the sentence the author actually wants you to believe is we should cancel school. That is the final destination. That is the roof of the house. And that's what the rest of the argument is built to support. The word so was just bait. And if you stopped there, you missed the full structure. That's why you can't trust these indicator words on their own. You've got to look at how the sentence functions inside the argument. And sometimes there's no conclusion word at all. The LSAT just gives you a wall of text and dares you to figure out the structure without any clues. And that's when students freeze. They panic. They reread the paragraph 5 times and still have no clue what the main point is. But here's the thing. The skill doesn't change. You still look for the sentence that is being supported by the rest. Just because there's no thus or therefore doesn't mean that structure isn't there. In fact, those are the best questions to practice on because they force you to actually understand the logic, not just scan for keywords. And sometimes the indicators are misleading on purpose. Let me give you another example. Quote, many people believe that increasing screen time is the cause of poor sleep. Therefore, limiting screen time is the best solution to the sleep crisis. However, this view ignores the role of stress, caffeine, and inconsistent schedules. Now pause. You see the word therefore, so you think, the conclusion is limiting screen time is the best solution. But read the whole thing again. The author isn't making that claim. They're describing what many people believe and then disagreeing with it. The real point, the author's conclusion, is in the last sentence. They're saying, this view ignores other factors. The sentence with therefore is not the author's conclusion, it's someone else's and it's being criticized. So if you pick that as your answer, the LSAT wins. That's the level of subtlety we're dealing with. So, what do you do instead? You use the indicator words the way you would use a flashlight in a dark room. It's helpful, but it's not enough. Don't rely on them blindly. Instead, combine them with this question. What is this sentence doing? Is it giving a reason? Is it summarizing? Is it offering background? Or is it making the final claim the author is trying to drive home? That's how you get good at this. Because the real skill isn't spotting words, it's recognizing roles. Once you start seeing how each sentence fits together, conclusion indicators stop being crutches and start becoming tools. And that's how you win at logical reasoning. Now, we've talked about conclusion indicator words, but what about the reasons the author gives? That's where premise indicators come in. And understanding them is just as important. Because when you can separate the support from the conclusion, you stop falling for trap answers that are 100% true and 100% wrong. Let me show you how this works. First, what is a premise? A premise is a sentence that supports something else. It's a reason. It's evidence. It's the because behind the should. If the conclusion is the punchline, the premise is the setup. Now here's where the LSAT gets clever. They love to bury true, reasonable, even persuasive premises, and then serve them up as wrong answers in main conclusion questions. You pick them, you feel good, and then you miss the question. So let's make sure you can spot a premise from a mile away. These are the words that often introduce a premise. Because, since, for, given that, due to, in light of, and assuming that. Let's look at a basic example. Quote, you should bring an umbrella because it looks like rain. Here's the structure. It looks like rain is the premise. You should bring an umbrella is the conclusion. Easy, right? The word because tells you that the first part is the reason and the second part is the claim it supports. But now imagine this shows up on the LSAT. They ask, what's the main conclusion of the argument? The wrong answer says, it looks like rain. True? Yes. Reasonable? Sure. Is it the conclusion? Absolutely not. And if you pick it, the test punishes you, not because you didn't understand the content, but because you didn't recognize the structure. Now, most people think their job in main conclusion questions is to pick the sentence that sounds important. But that's not your job. Your job is to pick the sentence that's being supported. That's it. The moment you spot a premise like since, for, because, your brain should light up and think, this is support, it's not the main point. But be careful, these words aren't always where you expect them. The LSAT loves to twist the order around. They might give you the conclusion first and the premise after. Like this, quote, you should bring an umbrella since it looks like rain. Or even, given that it looks like rain, you should bring an umbrella. The word order changes, but the structure doesn't. The moment you see given that or since, mark that chunk as a reason, not the takeaway. And watch how that one habit improves your accuracy across the board. Now, sometimes premises look like conclusions, and that's, of course, a trap. You read a stimulus, you see a sentence with the word because, and you see that it's a reasonable claim, and you pick it as your answer, but it's just a premise. And the LSAT writers are counting on you to miss that. That's why they put that choice there, because it feels like a safe, true, defensible pick. And it is, except it's not the main conclusion. You've got to remember that a fact being true is not the same as it being the correct answer. On main conclusion questions, truth doesn't matter if it's not what the author is trying to prove. The only thing that matters is function. Is this sentence supporting something else? If so, it's a premise and it's not the answer. Let's work with an example. Quote, the company's profits fell 12% this quarter primarily due to rising raw material costs. Therefore, management should renegotiate supplier contracts. What's the conclusion? Not profits fell, not raw material costs rose. It's that management should renegotiate supplier contracts. Everything else supports that claim. Now, if the LSAT offers the following as an answer choice, quote, the company's profits fell 12%, don't touch it. It's true, but it's not the conclusion. And that's how they get you. Let's talk about what happens when the LSAT takes off the training wheels. No therefore, no because, no since, thus, clearly, or so. Just a block of dense text, no signals, and a main conclusion question waiting to punish you if you panic. This is where students freeze. They reread the paragraph 3 times. They highlight random sentences. They start second-guessing everything. And then they pick whatever sentence feels right. This is where the test separates the students who memorize tricks from the ones who actually understand how arguments work. So, if there are no indicator words, what do? You use the why test. It's simple, it's powerful, and it works every time. Here's how it works. You start at the beginning of the stimulus and you read each sentence one by one. For every sentence, ask, why is the author saying this? In other words, what purpose is this sentence serving? Is it leading somewhere? Is it supporting something else? If the answer is yes, if the sentence is there to justify another claim, then it's a premise. So keep going and ask why again. Keep tracing the logic until you hit a sentence that doesn't support anything else, but is supported by everything that came before. That's your conclusion. That is the final claim the author is trying to get you to believe. Let's use an example. Eating late at night has been linked to higher blood sugar levels in multiple studies. People who skip breakfast tend to consume more calories later in the day. Late night snacking is also associated with poor sleep. These findings suggest that shifting meals to earlier in the day may improve metabolic health. There are no indicator words, no therefore, no because, just 4 sentences, all factual, and no clear structure. So, what do most students do? They latch onto whatever sounds the most scientific. The phrase, for example, late night snacking is associated with poor sleep, seems important. Or they just guess and pick the last sentence because it's last. Here's what you should do instead. Run the why test. Ask, why is the author telling me about studies linking late eating to blood sugar? To support something. Why did they mention that people who skip breakfast eat more later? That's also support. And why do they mention poor sleep from late night snacking? Again, support. Now read the last sentence. Quote, these findings suggest that shifting meals earlier may improve metabolic health. Why is the author saying that? That is the point. It's not supporting anything else. It's the idea the rest of the paragraph is building toward. That's the conclusion. You didn't need keywords, you didn't need a diagram, you just asked why and followed the logic. Now, the reason this works so well is because it forces you to look at how the sentences relate to each other. It takes you out of that passive reading mode where you're just scanning and hoping something clicks. Instead, it puts you in an active structure detection mode where you're tracing the logic, sentence by sentence, until you find the anchor. And once you get used to reading this way, you'll start seeing the argument's structure without even trying. You're going to feel it, because arguments aren't just random sentences stuck together. They are blueprints. And if you read carefully, the structure tells you what the author wants you to believe. And once you find that, that's your answer. Now here's one more example, this time with a twist. Quote, some critics argue that electric cars aren't truly green since their batteries require rare earth mining. Others point out that the electricity used to charge them often comes from fossil fuels. However, recent studies show that even accounting for these factors, electric vehicles still have a significantly lower carbon footprint than gas-powered cars. So it makes sense to support policies that encourage electric vehicle adoption. Let's use the why test again. First sentence, why is the author bringing up critics? To introduce a counterpoint, aka background. The second sentence is more background. The third sentence gives us studies that counter the critics. so we're getting closer. Final sentence, so it makes sense to support policies. Why is the author saying that? Because the previous sentence, the study results, support it. That's the final claim. That is the main conclusion. Everything else was set up. The why test just helped you trace the chain of reasoning and land at the destination. Bottom line, indicator words are nice, but the LSAT often takes them away on purpose. They want to see if you can still follow the argument when the map is gone. That's what the why test gives you, a way to reconstruct the logic even when there are no signs telling you where to go. It's not fancy, it's not complicated, but it works. Now let's talk about a trap that fools even strong students. You find a sentence in the stimulus that looks like a conclusion. It's got confidence. It's backed up by a reason. It even has the word therefore in front of it. So you pick it and you get it wrong. Why? Because you picked a sub-conclusion, not the main conclusion. A sub-conclusion is like a stepping stone. It is a claim that is both supported and supporting. It sits in the middle of the argument. It's supported by earlier premises, and then it goes on itself to support a bigger point. The main conclusion is the final stop. It's the statement that is only supported, never supporting. And the main conclusion is the one the LSAT is testing you on. So let's look at a new example. Quote, employees working under natural light report higher job satisfaction than those under fluorescent lights. Therefore, natural lighting improves mood and productivity. Since happier, more productive employees perform better, companies should invest in office designs that maximize sunlight exposure. Now, let's walk through this. First step, identify the pieces. The first sentence says, employees working under natural light report higher satisfaction. This is a premise. It's a fact. The second sentence is, natural lighting improves mood and productivity. This is a sub-conclusion. It's supported by the first sentence, but it's also being used to support the next claim. The third sentence says, companies should invest in office designs that maximize sunlight. That is the main conclusion. That's what the entire argument is building towards. Step 2, we spot the trap. The LSAT might give you both the sub-conclusion and the main conclusion as answer choices, and they're going to make the sub-conclusion sound airtight. Quote, natural lighting improves mood and productivity. It sounds logical, it feels safe, and it even matches the middle sentence word for word. But it's wrong. Why? Because that sentence is still being used to support the final recommendation. The real point, the thing the author is pushing for, is the last sentence. Companies should redesign offices to maximize sunlight. That is the main conclusion. So when you find what seems like a conclusion, ask yourself, does the author stop here, or are they using this to build towards something else? If the sentence continues supporting something else, it's a sub-conclusion, even if it's introduced with therefore, even if it sounds confident, and even if you agree with it. The LSAT doesn't care if it sounds like the end of the argument. It cares whether it functions as the final point. So ask, if I remove this sentence, could the argument still reach the final claim? If the answer is yes, if the sentence is doing work to support something else, it's a sub-conclusion or a premise. If the answer is no, if it's the last idea standing, supported by everything else, that's your main conclusion. Let me clear up one of the biggest misconceptions LSAT students have, that the conclusion is probably the last sentence. Nope. That's like thinking the most important scene in a movie is always the final line of dialogue. Sometimes it is, but sometimes it's in the middle, and sometimes it's right at the start. The LSAT does not follow the structure of your college essays, where the thesis always comes at the end of the intro paragraph. The LSAT is written to disorient you, and if you make assumptions about where the conclusion should be, the LSAT's going to punish you for it. So here's the truth. The conclusion can appear anywhere in the stimulus, beginning, middle, or end. Your job is not to predict where it will be. Your job is to recognize it when you see it. Some LSAT arguments come out swinging. Right from the jump, they tell you what they believe, then they spend the rest of the paragraph trying to justify it. For example, quote, clearly, The city should eliminate parking minimums for new construction. These regulations drive up housing costs and limit density. In cities that have removed them, housing availability has improved. The first sentence is the main conclusion, and the rest of the paragraph is there to support it. But most students blow right past that. Why? Because they're expecting the conclusion to come at the end. They think, this must just be a topic sentence, and they treat it like background. But the word clearly is a conclusion indicator. The rest of the paragraph is evidence, and this happens all the time on the LSAT. Don't assume the stimulus is building toward a conclusion. Sometimes it's already stated it, and the rest is just scaffolding. Now let's flip it around and look at a situation where the conclusion is last. And this is the one most students expect. It does happen, but it's not a rule. Here's what it could look like. Quote, remote work reduces commuting costs. It also improves employee satisfaction. Therefore, companies should continue to offer remote options even after the pandemic. That last sentence is the main conclusion. The first two are premises. Simple enough. But here's the problem. The LSAT knows you're looking at the end, so they'll throw in a subconclusion at the end, or repeat a premise using stronger language, or insert a trap word like thus in the middle of a distracting side point. Bottom line, location gives you zero guarantees. Now, the tricky situation is where the conclusion is in the middle, and this is where most students get wrecked. Why? Because the middle of a paragraph feels like the setup zone. You're not expecting a major shift. So when the conclusion lands, you miss it, or worse, you mistake it for a premise. Here's an example. Quote, many people believe school uniforms promote discipline, but those claims are overstated. Studies have found no significant difference in behavior between students who wear uniforms and those who don't. Therefore, mandatory uniform policies should be reconsidered. However, more research is needed. At first glance, this looks like it ends on a neutral note. More research is needed. But don't get distracted by that. The main conclusion comes prior to that. Mandatory uniform policies should be reconsidered. That's what the author wants you to walk away believing. Everything else is either setup, support, or a soft maybe tacked on for complexity. If you stopped reading before that key sentence, you'd miss the entire point. If you only looked at the final sentence, you would get baited. That's why you don't read for position, you read for purpose. So, what should you do? Forget the idea that the conclusion has a natural spot. On the LSAT, the only thing that matters is function. What sentence is being supported? And what sentence is not supporting anything else? Once you answer that, you've got your conclusion no matter where it shows up. So, if you want a quick strategy, after reading the stimulus, try to paraphrase the argument in your own words. Like, for example, the author is saying X, and they're using A, B, and C to back it up. That X is your conclusion, regardless of whether it came first, last, or in the middle. So you've read the stimulus, you found the conclusion, and you feel good about it. Then you go to the choices, and boom, two of them feel really close. Same general idea, same topic, but one sounds a little stronger. The other sounds a little softer. And now you're stuck. Let me tell you exactly what's going on and how to avoid it. This is one of the most subtle and effective LSAT tricks. They take the real conclusion and give you a choice that either broadens it too far or strengthens it too much. And most students fall for it because the answer sounds logical. It feels like it matches the conclusion. But the LSAT isn't checking if it sounds logical. It's checking if it matches the scope and strength of the author's actual words. Here's an example. Quote, students who study in multiple short sessions retain more information than those who study in one long block. Therefore, spacing out study sessions is usually more effective for long-term retention. Let's break it down. The conclusion says spacing it out is better. Not always, just usually. The goal is long-term retention. Here come the choices. Watch how small changes destroy the match. Choice A says students should always study in short sessions to retain information. Sounds close, but always is too strong. The original said usually more effective. This answer overshoots. B says spacing out study sessions is often a better method for remembering information long term. Often matches usually. Better method matches more effective. So the tone and scope are right in line. Bingo, that's your answer. Now, the right answer has got to match three things. First, the type of claim. Is it a judgment, a prediction, or a recommendation? It's also got to match the scope. Is it talking about some, most, or all? It's also got to match the strength. Is it cautious, like saying probably or usually? Or is it confident, saying always or must? Even if the idea is correct, the wrong tone makes it the wrong answer. Now, when you're stuck in the 160s and trying to break into the 170s, this is the killer. You've done the hard work. You found the right part of the stimulus. But then you rush the answer choices and pick the one that almost says what the author said. Close enough is not close enough. Almost doesn't count on the LSAT. If the author said probably and you pick an answer that said definitely, you're wrong. If the author talks about some students and your answer talks about all students, also wrong, even if the core idea is the same. That's how precise this test is. So here's a habit that will save you every time. After you ID the conclusion, restate it in your own words and include the qualifiers. You could even say it out loud. The author in that example was saying that usually shorter study sessions work better for retention, not test scores, not everyone, not always. Use that as your benchmark. Then you scan each answer and you ask, does this match the tone, the scope, and the purpose? If it doesn't, eliminate it, even if it feels close. Now, there are certain red flag words you should watch out for when you're reading the choices. The following shift the strength of the claim. Always, never, must, cannot, definitely, and certainly. Then you have words that expand the scope of their claim, like all, every, none, most, and only. Of course, these words can appear in correct answers, but only if they match the author's language. If they make the answer more extreme than the conclusion, eliminate it. Now, you found the conclusion, you've paraphrased it, you feel confident, then you get to the choices and 2 or 3 look really good. You read them again, you doubt yourself, and you end up picking the one that feels right, and the LSAT punishes you for it. Not because you didn't understand the stimulus, but because you fell into a trap answer. The kind that's engineered to trick people who almost know what they're doing. The first big trap is the premise restatement, and this gets students who are focused on accuracy, but not structure. The LSAT will take a sentence that's clearly in the stimulus, it's a true fact, maybe even something important, and they put it in an answer choice. But it's a premise, not the conclusion. And on main conclusion questions, truth does not matter if the sentence isn't the author's final point. Here's an example, quote, fruits contain natural sugars that provide quick energy. Bananas, for instance, are rich in potassium and easy to digest. Therefore, they make a good snack before intense physical activity. So what's the conclusion? Not that bananas are rich in potassium. Not that fruits have natural sugars. It's that bananas make a good pre-workout snack. If an answer says bananas are rich in potassium, that's technically true, but it's just a premise, not the author's argument, so we eliminate it. The second big trap is a shift in strength or a shift in scope. And this shows up when an answer almost matches the conclusion, but then it adds one word that changes everything. Let's stay with that banana example. The author says, bananas make a good snack before intense physical activity. Now imagine the following answer choice. Bananas are the best possible snack before intense workouts. That's not what the author said. The original was modest. They said a good snack. But this answer takes it way further to say the best possible. That is a strength mismatch. It's subtle, but it's wrong. Always compare the intensity and scope of the answer with the original conclusion. Match it exactly or don't pick it at all. Now, the third big trap is the subconclusion, because you're spotting a sentence in the stimulus that was supported by earlier facts, but then one sentence later, the author goes even further. That's when you know you just found a subconclusion. So, in our example, bananas are rich in potassium and easy to digest. Therefore, they make a good pre-workout snack. Bananas are healthy is a sub-conclusion. It's supported, but it also supports something else. It's not the end of the argument, it's a stop along the way. The fourth trap is the inference, and this is the most tempting wrong answer of them all. The LSAT will give you a statement that logically follows from the argument, but that the author never actually said. And because it sounds so reasonable, and you know that it's probably true, you pick it. But this is not an inference question, it is a main conclusion question. And if the author did not explicitly say the idea, it's not the right answer. So let's say the stimulus says, quote, bananas digest easily and provide quick energy. Therefore, they make a good pre-workout snack. And the answer choice says, athletes should eat bananas before every workout. Seems close, but the author never actually made that recommendation. They never said should. They never said every workout. So that's your leap, not theirs, which means this is not the right answer. So all these trap answers, they are playing on your instincts. They feel safe, they sound familiar, they echo parts of the stimulus, but they are not what the author is arguing for. They're either true, but they're not the main point. They might be slightly stronger than the original. They might be a stepping stone to the real conclusion, or they might be a logical next step, but not something the author actually said. So if you want to avoid falling for these traps, you've got to paraphrase the conclusion before looking at the answers. And avoid falling in love with an answer that sounds right. Make sure that you match the tone, match the scope, and match the intent. And ask, was this sentence supported by something else, or is everything else supporting this? That's how you find the main conclusion. And that's how you beat trap answers that trick 160 level students every single day.